There are some photographs that capture more than just a moment in time. Some images reveal truths so horrifying that they change everything we thought we knew about the places they document. In 1954, a routine prison guard photograph taken at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary revealed something hidden behind the cell bars that would ultimately contribute to the prison's closure 9 years later. When experts enhanced this seemingly innocent image decades later, they discovered evidence of such disturbing phenomena that it explained why the most escape-proof prison in America was suddenly abandoned by its own wardens. Before we dive into this chilling investigation, I need you to hit that follow button right now, because what you're about to learn will forever change how you view one of America's most notorious prisons. The truth about why Alcatraz really closed has been hidden for over 60 years, and what I'm about to reveal will shock you to your core. The photograph was taken on November 18, 1954, by prison photographer Samuel Morrison during a routine documentation session in Cell Block D. The image shows Correctional Officer Thomas Wheeler standing proudly in the main corridor, his crisp uniform immaculate, his posture confident and professional. Behind him, the notorious isolation cells of D Block stretch into the shadows, cells that housed the prison's most dangerous and violent inmates, men who had been deemed too dangerous for general population. But when digital enhancement technology was applied to this photograph in 2019, experts discovered something that defied explanation. Behind the bars of what appeared to be empty cells, dozens of human figures could be seen standing in perfect formation. These weren't inmates. The cells had been officially emptied during the photo session, and the figures were wearing clothing from different time periods, spanning nearly a century. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a forensic photography expert at Stanford University, was the first to notice the anomaly. Using advanced pixel analysis and shadow enhancement techniques, she was able to reveal details that were invisible to the naked eye, but somehow captured by the 1954 camera. What she found made her question everything she understood about photographic evidence. The enhanced image showed what appeared to be ghostly prisoners from different eras of Alcatraz's history. Military prisoners from the 1800s, when the island was a fort, federal inmates from the 1930s and 40s, and even figures in clothing that seemed to belong to time periods that hadn't occurred yet. All of them stood behind the bars in identical poses, their hands gripping the steel bars, their faces pressed against the metal as if desperately trying to escape not just their cells, but time itself. But here's where the story becomes truly terrifying, and I need you to engage with this mystery. Comment below and tell me, have you ever felt like you were being watched in a place where no one else should be present? Have you ever experienced the sensation that a location held memories of events you never witnessed? Because what happened at Alcatraz goes far beyond ordinary paranormal activity. Guard Thomas Wheeler, the subject of the 1954 photograph, began experiencing disturbing phenomena immediately after the photo session. According to his personal journal, which was discovered in his family's attic in 2018, Wheeler started hearing voices from the empty cells in D Block, not whispers or faint sounds, but clear conversations between multiple people, as if the cells were fully occupied, even when they stood empty. Wheeler's journal entries became increasingly erratic throughout 1954 and 1955. He described seeing prisoners in cells that had been empty for years, watching inmates perform daily routines in spaces that showed no signs of recent habitation. Most disturbing, he wrote about discovering that some of the prisoners he was seeing had died decades earlier, before the federal penitentiary had even opened on the island. The journal revealed that Wheeler wasn't the only guard experiencing these phenomena. By 1955, nearly half of the correctional staff had reported similar encounters. Guards would conduct cell counts and find discrepancies, seeing inmates who weren't on any roster, hearing responses from voices that belonged to men who had died years earlier. The psychological strain on the staff became so severe that turnover rates skyrocketed, with experienced guards requesting transfers to other federal facilities, despite the prestige and higher pay associated with working at Alcatraz. Warden Paul Madigan, who ran Alcatraz from 1955 to 1961, initially dismissed these reports as stress-related hallucinations. But when he began experiencing the phenomena himself, he started a secret investigation into the prison's supernatural activity. His confidential files, released under a Freedom of Information Act request in 2015, documented systematic paranormal occurrences that escalated throughout the late 1950s. According to Madigan's reports, the supernatural activity centered around D Block, specifically the isolation cells known as the Hole. These cells had been used for solitary confinement since the prison's opening, housing inmates who had violated prison rules or were considered too dangerous for general population. But Madigan's investigation revealed that something far more sinister had been occurring in these cells than simple punishment. The warden discovered that several inmates had died under mysterious circumstances in the D-block isolation cells. Official records listed these deaths as suicides or natural causes. But Madigan's private investigation uncovered evidence of something far more disturbing. Inmates who entered certain cells in perfect health would emerge after their isolation periods physically and mentally broken, claiming they had been tortured by invisible forces throughout their confinement. Here's where I need you to share this story and comment below about any experiences you've had with places that felt fundamentally wrong. Because what Madigan discovered suggests that some locations can become so saturated with human suffering that they develop a malevolent consciousness of their own. The most disturbing case documented in Madigan's files involved an inmate named Marcus Holloway, who was placed in cell 14D for attacking a guard in 1953. Holloway was a violent career criminal, but he was physically healthy and mentally stable when he entered the isolation cell. After 3 days in solitary confinement, guards found him catatonic, staring at the wall with an expression of absolute terror frozen on his face. Medical examination revealed that Holloway had suffered severe psychological trauma, but there was no evidence of physical abuse or injury. When he finally regained the ability to speak weeks later, he claimed that the cell had been occupied by dozens of previous inmates, all of them still serving their sentences in some form of supernatural purgatory. According to Holloway, these ghostly prisoners had subjected him to psychological torture, forcing him to experience every moment of suffering that had occurred in that cell since the prison's opening. Holloway's account was initially dismissed as a stress-induced delusion, but similar reports began emerging from other inmates who had been placed in D-block isolation. Each prisoner described identical experiences, being tormented by invisible inmates from previous decades, hearing the voices of men who had died in custody, and experiencing the accumulated trauma of everyone who had ever been confined in those cells. Dr. Edmund Cray, a psychiatrist brought in to evaluate the affected inmates, initially approached their accounts with clinical skepticism, but as he interviewed more prisoners who had experienced similar phenomena, he began to document patterns that couldn't be explained by conventional psychology. The inmates were describing specific details about former prisoners and historical events that they had no way of knowing, providing information that was later verified through prison records. Dr. Cray's confidential report to Warden Madigan, dated March 15, 1957, stated, "The affected inmates are not suffering from conventional psychological disorders. They appear to be experiencing genuine contact with past events that occurred in these facilities. The level of specific historical detail they provide, combined with the consistency of their accounts, suggests they are somehow accessing memories or consciousness that does not belong to them." The psychiatrist's investigation revealed that the supernatural phenomena at Alcatraz were not random ghostly encounters, but rather evidence of what he termed temporal bleeding, moments when the extreme psychological pressure and human suffering concentrated in the isolation cells had created fractures in the normal flow of time. The D-block cells had become repositories of every moment of anguish experienced within their walls, creating a supernatural prison where the consciousness of former inmates remained trapped long after their physical deaths. This is where the story becomes absolutely terrifying for anyone who has ever visited Alcatraz, and I need you to really consider what this means. If you've ever taken a tour of the prison, if you've ever stood in those cells or walked those corridors, you may have been exposed to more than just historical architecture. Comment below and tell me about any strange experiences you had during your visit, feelings of being watched, sudden temperature changes, or hearing sounds that shouldn't have been there. Warden Madigan's investigation took a darker turn when he attempted to document the supernatural activity using the prison's security cameras. The footage revealed phenomena that were visible on film, but not to the human eye during recording. Empty cells would show on camera as fully occupied, with ghostly figures moving about their daily routines, eating meals that weren't there, conversing with cellmates who didn't exist, following schedules that belonged to different decades. Most disturbing, the security footage showed that the ghostly inmates were aware of being watched. They would look directly at the cameras, some attempting to communicate with gestures and mouthed words. A few appeared to be trying to warn the living guards about dangers that were approaching, as if they retained some awareness of events unfolding in the present timeline. the enhanced 1954 photograph of Guard Wheeler, provided the final piece of evidence that Madigan needed to understand the scope of the supernatural infestation at Alcatraz. Digital analysis revealed that the ghostly prisoners visible behind the bars were not random spirits, but rather every inmate who had ever been confined in deep black, existing simultaneously in a supernatural state that transcended normal concepts of life and death. The photograph captured what experts now believe was a temporal convergence event, a moment when the barriers between past, present, and future became thin enough for all the imprisoned consciousness to manifest simultaneously. Guard Wheeler had unknowingly photographed evidence of a supernatural prison that existed parallel to the physical facility, where the souls of former inmates continued serving eternal sentences in conditions far worse than anything imagined by federal prison administrators. Dr. Martinez's analysis of the enhanced photograph revealed details that still disturb paranormal researchers today. The ghostly inmates visible behind the bars showed signs of physical decay and regeneration, cycling through states of death and resurrection as if trapped in an endless loop of suffering. Some appeared to be screaming, their mouths open in silent agonies that the 1954 camera had somehow captured despite the absence of sound recording equipment. More unsettling, the photograph showed that the supernatural prisoners were organized into a hierarchy that reflected their crimes and the circumstances of their deaths. Inmates who had died violently or under suspicious circumstances occupied positions of power within the ghostly prison population, while those who had merely served their sentences and died naturally appeared to be subjected to ongoing torment by their more malevolent fellow spirits. The implications of this discovery sent shockwaves through the federal prison system. Though the information was classified and never released to the public, officials realized they were not just operating a maximum security facility for living criminals, but also managing a supernatural prison that had been accumulating the consciousness of the dead for decades. Here's where you need to understand how this connects to Alcatraz's eventual closure, and I want you to share this revelation with others because it changes everything we thought we knew about America's most notorious prison. The official reasons given for Alcatraz's closure in 1963, high operating costs, structural deterioration, and the famous 1962 escape attempt, were cover stories designed to hide the real reason the facility was abandoned. By 1960, the supernatural activity at Alcatraz had become so severe that it was affecting the prison's ability to function as a correctional facility. Guards were suffering psychological breakdowns at unprecedented rates. Inmates were refusing to enter certain areas of the prison, and the isolation cells in D Block had become completely unusable due to the intensity of paranormal phenomena occurring within them. Warden Madigan's final report to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, dated January 12, 1962, recommended immediate closure of the facility. The classified document, which remained sealed until 2019, stated, "The supernatural infestation of this facility has reached levels that compromise the safety of both staff and inmates. The isolation cells can no longer be used for their intended purpose, as placement of any living person in these spaces results in severe psychological trauma. The ghostly inmates appear to be growing stronger and more aggressive, and there is evidence they may soon develop the ability to physically interact with the living population." The 1962 escape attempt by Frank Maurice and the Anglin brothers provided the perfect cover story for closing Alcatraz. While the escape was real, it was not the primary factor in the prison's closure. Instead, it gave federal officials a plausible public explanation for shutting down a facility that had become uninhabitable due to supernatural forces. The enhanced 1954 photograph provided the final evidence needed to confirm what prison administrators had suspected for years. Alcatraz had become a breeding ground for supernatural phenomena that threatened to spread beyond the island itself. The ghostly inmates trapped within the facility were beginning to manifest in locations throughout San Francisco, appearing in mainland buildings and terrifying civilians who had no connection to the prison system. Dr. Rebecca Martinez's analysis team discovered that the supernatural energy concentrated at Alcatraz was not contained to the island. Using electromagnetic field detectors and thermal imaging equipment, they found evidence of spiritual bleed-through occurring at various points around San Francisco Bay. Former prisoners who had died at Alcatraz were appearing in locations they had known before their incarceration, creating a network of supernatural activity that extended far beyond the prison walls. The government's response to this discovery was swift and decisive. Within months of Dr. Martinez's report being submitted to federal authorities, Her research was classified, and she was reassigned to a different project. All copies of the enhanced 1954 photograph were supposedly destroyed, though bootleg versions continue to circulate in underground paranormal research networks. Now I need you to understand the current situation. And this is where the story becomes relevant to all of us. Today, Alcatraz Island is now a National Park Service site that welcomes over 1 million tourists annually. These visitors are walking through areas where some of the most intense supernatural activity in American history has been documented, often with no knowledge of the paranormal dangers they may be encountering. Current park rangers and tour guides report ongoing unexplained phenomena. Though they are prohibited from discussing these experiences with the public, visitors frequently describe feeling watched while touring the isolation cells, hearing voices in empty corridors, and experiencing sudden drops in temperature that cannot be explained by the island's climate. Most disturbing, the enhanced 1954 photograph revealed that the supernatural inmates are still present and active. Digital analysis shows that new figures have been added to the ghostly population behind the bars, suggesting that the supernatural prison continues to claim new victims. Even decades after the facility's official closure, some paranormal researchers believe that certain tourists who visit Alcatraz and spend extended time in the most haunted areas of the prison may be at risk of spiritual attachment or possession by the trapped inmates. They point to cases of visitors who return from Alcatraz tours with dramatic personality changes, new phobias related to confinement, and recurring nightmares featuring prison scenarios they never experienced in life. Here's where you need to share this story and engage with the community, because understanding these risks may be crucial for anyone planning to visit Alcatraz. Comment below if you've experienced any unusual phenomena during or after visiting the island. Have you felt drawn to return to specific cells or areas of the prison? Have you experienced dreams featuring prison life despite never being incarcerated? These could be signs of supernatural attachment that require attention from paranormal specialists. The enhanced 1954 photograph has revealed that Alcatraz represents something far more dangerous than a historic tourist attraction. It is an active, supernatural site where the boundary between the living and the dead has been permanently damaged by decades of human suffering and despair. The ghostly inmates visible in God Wheeler's photograph are not peaceful spirits seeking closure. They are malevolent entities that feed on the fear and negative emotions of living visitors. Dr. Martinez's research team discovered that the supernatural inmates have developed a sophisticated understanding of modern technology and psychology. They have learned to manipulate electronic devices, influence photography equipment, and even affect the mental state of visitors through subtle psychological manipulation. The enhanced photograph shows evidence that these entities are actively recruiting new victims, using the tour experience to identify individuals who may be susceptible to spiritual possession or attachment. The most chilling discovery from the photograph analysis was evidence that the supernatural inmates are working together to break free from their dimensional prison. Digital enhancement revealed communication networks between different cell blocks, suggesting that the ghostly prisoners have maintained their criminal organization and are planning some form of mass supernatural escape that could flood the San Francisco Bay Area with malevolent spirits. Government paranormal specialists now believe that the 1954 photograph captured a pivotal moment in this supernatural conspiracy. God Wheeler unknowingly documented the organization meeting where the ghostly inmates planned their long-term strategy for escaping their dimensional confinement and establishing control over the physical world. The implications extend far beyond Alcatraz itself. If the supernatural inmates succeed in breaking free from the island, they could establish a criminal organization in the spirit world that would make their living counterparts seem benign by comparison. These entities possess decades of criminal experience, combined with supernatural abilities that would make them nearly impossible for law enforcement to combat. Intelligence gathered from the enhanced photograph suggests that the ghostly inmates have already begun infiltrating the mainland, using their supernatural abilities to influence living criminals and corrupt law enforcement officials. Some researchers believe that the recent increase in violent crime rates in the San Francisco Bay Area may be partially attributed to spiritual possession by escaped Alcatraz inmates. This is the real reason why the 1954 photograph has been suppressed by government agencies. It provides evidence of a supernatural threat that could fundamentally destabilize human society if it continues to grow unchecked. The ghostly inmates of Alcatraz represent the first organized supernatural criminal organization in recorded history, and their potential for causing chaos extends far beyond anything previously imagined. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this discovery is what it reveals about the nature of human consciousness and the afterlife. The enhanced photograph suggests that extreme psychological trauma and criminal behavior can corrupt the soul to such an extent that death provides no escape from suffering. The inmates trapped at Alcatraz are experiencing an eternal punishment that is far worse than any sentence they received during their lifetimes. This raises disturbing questions about the true purpose of maximum security prisons and the long-term consequences of concentrating violent criminals in isolated environments. The supernatural infestation at Alcatraz may not be unique. Similar phenomena could be developing at other high-security facilities around the world, creating a network of supernatural prisons that threaten to merge with our physical reality. As I conclude this terrifying investigation, I want you to understand that you are now part of a select group of people who know the truth about why Alcatraz was really abandoned. The official story of financial constraints and structural problems was a carefully constructed cover-up designed to hide evidence of supernatural phenomena that government officials still don't fully understand. If you're planning to visit Alcatraz, approach the experience with caution and respect for the supernatural forces that still inhabit the island. Avoid spending extended time alone in the isolation cells. Don't take photographs using flash equipment that might attract unwanted spiritual attention. And be aware of any unusual sensations or experiences that occur during your visit. Pay attention to your dreams and mental state in the weeks following any visit to Alcatraz. If you begin experiencing recurring nightmares about prison life, sudden phobias related to confinement, or personality changes that seem out of character, seek help from paranormal specialists who understand the risks associated with supernatural. Comment below and share your own experiences with Alcatraz or other locations where you've felt the presence of supernatural forces. Building a community of aware individuals who understand these risks may be our best defense against the growing threat posed by organized supernatural entities. Remember that the enhanced 1954 photograph revealed something that prison administrators, government officials, and paranormal researchers are still struggling to comprehend. Alcatraz isn't just a historic site. It's an active supernatural battleground where the fate of human consciousness itself may be decided. The ghostly inmates visible behind the bars in Godwheeler's photograph are still there, still planning, still waiting for their opportunity to escape into our world. They have had nearly 70 years to perfect their strategy, and they possess knowledge and abilities that we are only beginning to understand. Share this story responsibly, but make sure others know the truth about America's most notorious prison. The official closure of Alcatraz in 1963 didn't end the suffering that occurred there. It only contained it temporarily. And according to the evidence revealed in the enhanced 1954 photograph, that containment may not hold much longer. The battle for human consciousness is being fought in dimensions we cannot see by forces we barely comprehend. The inmates of Alcatraz have become something far more dangerous than ordinary criminals. They have evolved into supernatural entities that threaten the very foundation of reality itself. Welcome to the truth about Alcatraz. Welcome to the real reason why the most secure prison in America was abandoned by its own wardens. Welcome to the ongoing supernatural war that most people never knew was happening, but which may determine the future of human civilization itself. The choice of how to use this knowledge is yours. But remember, in a world where the dead can organize more effectively than the living, the most important skill is learning to recognize when you're being watched by eyes that see across the boundaries of life and death.